So I should update you. I know I've told or mentioned this to Lily, but that book is still under construction. I haven't yet done my sort of full work in this Gilded Age, Global Age book, but I did just write a manuscript because I just came back from a sabbatical. The title of that book is called Amateur Hour, and the subtitle is Presidential Character and the Question of Leadership. So that book is really based in some ways on some of the things I'll talk about today, but it is also really a discussion about, at some level, why is it that politics is the only field in which we think having no experience is the best experience. And I think that that is really troubling, and it's something that's happened for a very long time. The book I just wrote basically goes from Jimmy Carter through Donald Trump. And it's really about how we have been in this place of being enamored with outsider amateurs for the last 40 years. And it's no surprise to me, at some level, that we're dissatisfied with it. I mean, the way I kind of describe it to people is, imagine if we decided to, in fact, fly a plane with the passengers as the pilots. How well do you think that would go? Because what we pretty much keep doing is we're like, oh, we don't like what the pilot did. I know, let's go grab a passenger. Then we throw them in the pilot seat, and then usually the plane loses altitude, and then we're like, oh, that was a bad passenger. Like, let's go find another one. And we are in this kind of circumstance, and while I'm somebody who really believes that everybody should be involved in politics, I don't believe that the presidency should be the first office that you run for. That's like saying, I know, why don't you learn to drive on an 18-wheeler semi-truck? You know, everybody learns to drive on like a little Kia or a little Toyota, right? Because you can't do a lot of damage. So it's good to like run for office at the city council level, at the mayoral level. You work your way up to Congress. You serve in the state legislature. You're one of many people. You actually gain some mentoring and experience and knowledge. And eventually, you make your way to the presidency. We haven't done that for the last 40 years because basically LBJ and Richard Nixon, who were the two sort of ultimate insiders, seriously disillusioned this country. And ever since then, we've kind of been like, well, we can't do that because everybody in Washington is this one. So here we are, looking toward a new presidential election. What I'm going to actually chat a little bit about today is some of this background that I just kind of laid out, but that's more the kind of broader context. And some of what's up on this slide is also a kind of broader context about understanding where and how we got Donald Trump. I know people have talked about this a lot, but I think it's really important because we don't really think about it as having had kind of a longer term dissatisfaction trail. And I think people get really enamored with Donald Trump's sort of, his bluster, his campaign, his way in which he punched at people and changed kind of the nomination dynamic. But in so many ways, he's just kind of this extension of what we've seen for a really long time. And part of what worked for him was essentially the cumulative built-up frustration that Americans have had with the fact that life in Washington hasn't really worked since the 90s. Okay? And so there is this place at which people say, well, let's see, the last time we had peace and prosperity, both together, and we had a government actually doing things, was when Bill Clinton was in the White House in the late 90s. We haven't really had anything but gridlock, acrimony, polarization, budget standoffs and stalemates since we turned the millennium. Now, some of you, were just barely like 5 years old when that happened. So I think it's really important to realize this sense of high levels of dissatisfaction. One of the other things I don't think, people take in is at some level, as much as Democrats appreciated Barack Obama, Republicans did not. And that's not just a conversation about who Barack Obama is. It's a conversation about party. Democrats couldn't stand George W. Bush. And this level at which both sides kind of hate each other is also partly what drove us to a place where Trump has kind of, taken this to 11, if you watch Spinal Tap. Everything is kind of off the charts. But it's really important to understand one thing, and I don't think many people do. When Barack Obama was elected in 2008, at the time of his inaugural, in January of 2009, he had a higher approval rating among Republicans than George W. Bush did in 2001 among Democrats. And he had a higher approval rating than Bill Clinton did in 1993 among Republicans. In other words, Barack Obama actually started his term with the greatest amount of goodwill than the two previous presidents did. But obviously, that goodwill dissipated very quickly. And we saw our sort of whole politics devolve into this partisan combat very rapidly. So this level of frustration, as I said, I think some of it is political, some of it is about what's been going on in Washington, some of it is about the fact that we have a lot of amateurs in office, some of it is about the fact that we think that celebrity is more important than performance or experience. The other piece is obviously we've been dealing with continual military conflict, wars, since 9/11, so 20 years. And we've also been sort of up and down with economic prosperity, right? We had an initial economic shock in 2001 that was related to a tech bubble bust, and then 9/11 occurred, and then there was a lot of sort of loosening of the gears to try to make sure that the economy did not fall apart at the exact same time that we were engaging in wars. So many of you don't remember, but I certainly do, right? What did George W. Bush say to us? Go shop. Okay, that makes sense. I guess that's exactly the response after 9/11. So he told us to go shop. And there were all these ways that you could get sort of easy money. And that stuff is part of what then led to a massive economic downturn in 2008. So we've had a frustrating economy, one, like I said, that's been up and down, and one that's mostly been good for either wealthy people or highly adept individuals in the technological world. So one of the things that I always say, and I really believe this, is I think about myself, right? I'm almost 50, and I can tell you that I have a PhD. I like learning. I love reading. But you know what? I can't stand the fact that like every day somebody's telling me to learn their new app. It's like, just download the app. Just go to our website. Just, and I think to myself, are you serious? Does anybody work anywhere else? Do I have to do all of the work for all of you and all of your companies? Because that's really what it means. It means that I have to spend my time trying to figure out how to actually move my money because there's no bankers. And so in this world that's supposedly a service economy, we're really in what's I would say better named a self-serve economy. We're mostly doing what we have to do. And all of this is just exhausting. I feel like I work an additional 4 to 5 hours every day for other companies and don't get paid just to actually complete all of the things in my life that I need to complete. Like I said, whether it's paying bills, whether it's doing the cable, whether it's my phone, whatever it is, I'm sort of doing things for other people. And all of this, well, for like digital natives, all of you who were sort of born in the late 90s and born into this world, that's a really great, normal, natural kind of thing. You don't really think about it. You kind of like all the choices you have. You love getting all the new apps. You're really excited about whatever it is. At the end of the day, most people who are sort of older than you, who didn't grow up with this stuff, they resent this. So there's a tremendous amount of feeling like the whole world is kind of not working and impinging upon you, and it's really hard to manage, even though purportedly it's easier to manage. So I think all of these kinds of things are part of what built up into this feeling of, well, nobody in Washington has any solution. That place is a total swamp, right? Everybody's supposedly corrupt, which, by the way, is not true. If you know anything about our political history, you know that Washington is to a large degree cleaner than it's ever been. I mean, really, if you read about the Gilded Age, well, you'll be shocked at the amount of sort of side deals and corruption and horrible things that were actually going on. And to a certain extent, I will say this. The Trump presidency has brought back a whole bunch of that stuff. But it's also true that, like I said, Americans sort of looked to Trump. There were a number of Americans who looked to Trump as being great. He's a real estate developer, and you know what that means? That means they bulldoze down whatever is there, and then they rebuild it. They take it over and they rebuild it. And so there was this way in which many Americans said to themselves, I know what the Clintons are going to bring me. The Clintons are going to bring me sort of Washington as usual. They'll probably also bring a lot of drama, because they've always had a lot of drama associated with them. And even though I served in President Bill Clinton's administration, and I still think he's the best president we've had in just about my lifetime, I would also argue that many people in the country dislike them, dislike sort of all that they represent. And so I think there is this problem where we just don't understand how other people could have seen Donald Trump as something of a savior. But they did. They did see him as someone who was going to come in, take it all over, and take it back. So all of that was a problem. The other problem, and this is where we're going to get into kind of talking about gender, is that at the end of the day, I do think Hillary Clinton was a problematic first woman nominee from a major political party. And she was a problematic first woman because really at the end of the day is that yes, there were sexist things going on all the time. That is not surprising to me. But it gets at what I was saying earlier. She was a Clinton. And you couldn't get around sort of the Clinton reputation to really separate her gender from her name, from this sense of a dynasty, from this belief that that she was always sort of in this world of, it was the right-wing conspiracies that attacked us. That was what she said, around Monica Lewinsky. And so this sense of that the drama was going to continue with the Clintons, that Hillary was kind of not the perfect woman. There will never be a perfect woman, but she, because of her identification with the Clintons, made it an even more difficult hurdle. I mean, one of the things that I deeply believe is that when you look at sort of this election, you look at all the people running, I don't think that the Republicans will be able to make any one of the current candidates who are still in office, who are still running for the nomination, as hated as Hillary. And this is, oddly enough, the scary dynamic about where we are right now. It's actually not a question of whether or not you're liked. It's a question of whether or not the other side can hate you. And that's where our partisan polarization has become very toxic. And I will also say this because I think it's important. It's part of what we talk about at our schools, part of what I really believe, which is that living in a democracy means you learn to have forbearance for the other side. Living in a democracy and being engaged in politics means that you realize that some days you're going to lose, some days you're going to win, some days it's going to be essentially a tie. You don't assume that the other side is illegitimate because they won. But we are in a place right now where all sort of any result somebody doesn't like is essentially deemed illegitimate. That's really problematic for a functioning democracy. And I do tell our students, look, if you're arguing for a one-party democracy, you're really arguing for a dictatorship. So you want to think about what it means when you think about the other side. I always say that my favorite thing that Bill Clinton said, he used to say it all the time, is that Republicans are like broken clock. They're like a broken clock. They're right twice a day. So you know what? Guess what that means? Twice a day you can work with them. But we are not in that world. We're in this world of like these fierce teams where there's this desire to vanquish. Well, if you vanquish, you're completely walking away from sort of what our whole country is founded on. James Madison's, Federalist 10 basically tells us that everybody is going to essentially think differently, and that pluralism is the only way to solve this. It's through a competition and through pluralism. And we're at a place now where people don't want pluralist ideas. They don't want ideas that challenge their own. They want ideas that agree with them. They want things to make them feel safe and comfortable and cozy. And everybody is happy within their little world. And anyone who sort of, busts up that little world is either attacked or ostracized. And that's really problematic. It's problematic for this country. So, as I said, Clinton, in 2016, I think she is a difficult place. There is no doubt. All the research shows that there were sexist evaluations of her by the media, by voters. All of these things are true. And I don't think we've gotten out of this. And it's also the case, as I said, that she is hard to analyze because of who she is. And it's also true that I think it would have been a more fascinating race, a much more fascinating race, if Carly Fiorina had actually won on the Republican side. And we had actually been able to see how sort of the gender was discussed, and whether and how different kind of sexist evaluations came in if the two top nominees were women. It would have been fascinating. And this brings me to a point which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's basically that this idea that having the right woman is more important than having a woman is actually really, really part of what's keeping the basically women from parity. Because at the end of the day, Democratic women are doing great. They're growing in the party's enlarging, they're winning elective offices. But guess what? Republican women are losing ground left, right, and center. And if we continue to have a country that is a two-party democracy, at least, two parties, then guess what? Women are pretty much never going to get to 50-50. because you have to have more strength of women within the Republican Party for there to be a greater sense of women all over. So turning back to history for a minute, one of the things that I think is important to realize is what hurt Hillary as a woman, not just what hurt her as a Clinton. I think I've addressed that. But as a woman, what hurt her? Well, the biggest thing is that leadership is defined culturally as masculine. At every level, we actually sort of think of leadership as being masculine. I find this hugely problematic because it conflates leadership with strength, which then gets also conflated with men. There is a sense that all leadership is about is sort of confronting or pushing forward. This is certainly the kind of leadership that our president subscribes to. Donald Trump pretty much believes you hit, hit, hit. That's all you do. There's no other aspect or approach to leadership. We also know that not only is sort of leadership in this world of strength and authority, and all of it kind of redounds to this sense of the masculine, there's also this other problem where women are not sort of immediately assumed to be legitimate when they first step into the stage. So for instance, as I come and I stand before you today, all the research shows that women have to prove themselves to actually be thought sort of legitimate and leaders. If a man came up here, he'd actually have to falter in order for you not to believe that he was a leader. So there is a tremendous amount of kind of a difference in perspective. And this is where it's fascinating because leadership is about the embodiment at some level of the person. And so the person becomes embodied. They are embodied in who they are. They can't change their body. And yet our definitions about what those bodies can do or be are tremendously limiting. In addition, when we think about the presidency is not like a monarchy. I mean, what is so fascinating is when you go to England, right? You had 2 women prime ministers, right? Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher. And guess what? They also had really strong queens. So Elizabeth I, Victoria, I mean, these women were not shy women. They were incredibly strong, powerful. They ruled their reigns for years. And this is where it's interesting. The United States, we don't have that. Our presidency traces to the military. It actually traces to General George Washington. When you look at who our presidential celebrities were for most of history, they were, guess what? Generals. Eisenhower, Jackson, Washington, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor. So we had all of these sort of individuals win the presidency because they had been celebrity generals. They had fought wars, they had been successful, they had a reputation as having been strong leaders, right, in this very masculine sense. It's only recently that women came into combat and that sort of women within the military is a known thing. It's also the case that, guess what? We haven't had a woman Secretary of Treasury or a woman Secretary of Defense. And you sort of think to yourself, why is it that women are only put into the State Department? You know why? Because the State Department is actually the Department of Peace. The Defense Department is the Department of War. We have a very hard time imagining a woman in that. We also have a hard time imagining a woman as Secretary of the Treasury. Why? Because money's hard, money's Wall Street, money's men. So all of these kind of background cultural cues are in fact part of what I think is the sort of bigger hurdle of getting women to the White House. Is because these sort of ingrained senses that it doesn't make sense to have a woman as Secretary of Defense. Well, if there's a woman can't have a woman as Secretary of Defense, can you really have her as Commander-in-Chief? And so we are in this place where we need to, I think, kind of bust up some of these stereotypes that exist if we're actually going to see women in these higher places. This is one of those things that I, like, if any of you sort of watch Scandal or you watch Grey's Anatomy, you know that Shonda Rhimes, the thing I love about her shows is one thing. She always messes with stereotypes. She always introduces a character and you have no idea who that character is, and then all of a sudden you're told and you're like, whoa, really? The heart surgeon's African American? Whoa, really? You know, the Jewish person is Chinese who went to Stanford? Oh, you know, these are the things that I love that she does, because she plays with our expectations at that level. And I'm somebody who really believes that stereotypes are so powerful and so pervasive and so much a part of our culture. Everybody has a stereotype. At my school, we actually teach a class called Stereotypes and Political Strategy. And it is all about trying to understand what is your stereotype, how are you going to be stereotyped on the campaign trail, and then how do you either make that work for you or how do you sort of bust that up? Because there is some place at which these unconscious predispositions, which is what stereotypes are, I mean, people judge in less than 1 second how somebody's going to be. These are our neurological, biological, evolutionary adaptations that are horrifically exclusionary. But they all came about because people were trying to figure out what their safety was in the world. So we haven't really fully undermined kind of what that is. And popular culture, as Professor Morin has told you and shared with you, I mean, her work on sort of popular culture and what it really means and why it is that women are not elected to the presidency. They're only ascending into the presidency. And then the whole shows are about their illegitimacy in that role. All of that, I think, is problematic. Of course, 2016 was the first time that we actually had a woman in a major party nomination. Sadly, I'm a little bit worried about whether or not that may be the last time for a while. So I will tell you that when I think of leadership, and this is sort of what I just wrote a book about, I actually think leadership involves 3 things. And I deeply believe that leadership comes in all packages because these are character traits. They are not sort of outward, external identity traits. They are character traits. They are about what you create in your character from your humanity, not about your innate capacity or your sort of socially constructed abilities. I deeply believe that at the end of the day, all leaders need to be able to lead with courage. They need to be able to approach leadership with courage. And what I mean by that is that traditional strength. It does mean that you have to have the ability to confront when it's important to confront. I also argue that leaders need to be able to approach leadership with curiosity, which is a different sort of ability than courage. So if you think of courage as moving forward into something, curiosity is about stepping backward and saying, do I need to ask more questions about this issue? Do I need to bring in some more experts? Maybe I need to learn more about this. Maybe I need to listen more, okay? Curiosity is about approaching a decision with, rather than a sense of, I've got a gut instinct, I know, which is what courage is about, is with sort of a discerning manner, right? A side where you say, maybe there's more to know here. And I think it's very important for leaders to be able to do that. I also believe that there's a third thing, and it is to be able to approach leadership with compassion. And what this is about sometimes the thing to do is neither to go into it nor step away, but just stay put and embrace it. Embrace where you are, embrace the emotions that are in that space, and learn how to hold and see and witness. Very good leaders do that too. So let me give you an example of George Washington leading with compassion. Most people would never think that George Washington could do that because he was actually a pretty cold person. And it's also true that while he could be curious, he did kind of have a tendency to, go into things. He did. His military heroics were, at times, pretty foolish and brutal when he was young. But when he was older, there was a moment where basically all of the soldiers were ready to sort of go off into a mutiny. They were so livid that the Congress hadn't paid them, that they hadn't been taken care of, that they didn't have clothes and all of this sort of their necessities, and that they had been fighting and fought the Revolutionary War. And because the Articles of Confederation were such a sort of horrible structure for creating interstate collaboration and agreement, basically our soldiers were left, with no shoes, no food, no provisions, no pensions, no nothing. So they did that at some level out of a tremendous amount of voluntary effort. Well, there's a very famous moment at Newburgh where George Washington knows that all the soldiers, all of his officers are about ready to mutiny. So he purposely comes up, and before he gives his speech, he kind of fumbles a little bit pulling out his speech. And he also fumbles to find a pair of spectacles. And he says then to sort of the entire officers who are assembled, he basically says, "Forgive me, I have lost much in this war. I've not only gone gray, but I've lost my eyesight." And supposedly, if you read the accounts of this, the soldiers pretty much broke into tears because they realized that the person who had actually given up so much and who still was not ready to mutiny because he believed in the experiment that was America, was in fact their leader. But that was a moment of leading with vulnerability. He led with a sense of compassion. I hear you. I have given up as much as you. I'm a mess. Can't see, totally gray, old and rickety. Okay? He didn't look at him and say, "You guys are wrong, I can't believe you have these feelings, and buck up," right? He didn't do any of that. There was no patent speech. This was a very different moment. And that kind of leadership, I think, is profoundly important. And this is where I would just say that as I said, I really believe that being able to lead in all three of these ways is something that can be done by any man, any woman, any person. Because it's really about having a sense of judgment, having a sense of prudence, being able to step back and understand the situation that you're in. I will tell you the book that I just wrote, I explain from my perspective that to do the job of the presidency requires a performance. All presidents must be actors. In fact, Ronald Reagan said, toward the end of his presidency, I don't know how you could do this job if you hadn't been an actor. And I think that that's true. I think all presidents must be actors. The problem is that we've decided that a celebrity is an actor. And a celebrity is not an actor. And I'll tell you why. Actors work. Actors work to perform a role. They work to understand the role. They deeply embed themselves in who that character is, what is needed at the time, how do they create, sort of facial expressions and bodily mannerisms and everything they can to inhabit and become the role they need to become. Celebrities are. They just am. They just sit. So celebrities don't work. A celebrity says, I'm so cool that I can just sit here and I can be my authentic, awful self and you'll still love me because I'm a celebrity. So celebrities are, actors work. And we've kind of lost this sense about why these things matter. And it's also true that in our past, and in the sort of historical past, when I talk about the celebrities as having been military heroes, fame meant that you did something to become famous. You actually achieved something, you accomplished something, you performed something, you created something. You did something. And the thing that you did actually made you famous. Fame, in a traditional classical Greek sense, was actually something that wasn't even conferred upon you until after you were dead. It was that your name was famous through history because you did something. And again, we have this problem where we're sort of like, oh, I don't know, you can just be famous for being famous. Isn't it great? I have all these like influencers. So I'm famous for being famous. Because people think I'm famous. Because I just am. And that is where I think we've gotten into sort of a really dangerous territory. But I would argue that more than anything, we need to kind of redefine what we mean by leadership. We have to think about leadership as being different approaches in different times. We have to think about what it means to have prudence. And the only way you can do that is if you have experience. So you need to have experience and knowledge. This is what Aristotle tells us. And that experience and knowledge, when you put it together, will help you make the right decision about the right approach at the right moment. And you need to do the work of what it means to be an actor, to understand the role that you exist within, and stop believing that it's about your own narcissism. Because we are in this place where we think that the role should just be me, not I actually have to step into a role, right? So when we think about roles, I always like to think about sports, because I am somebody who loves sports. I love politics. It's no surprise. But it's also true, right, that there are those football players, when you watch football, who step in and exceed the expectations of their role, right? Whether it's quarterback or running back or wide receiver or lineman, they do a phenomenal job in that role. They are the best of the best. And they're very different from those who actually don't necessarily do their role well and assume that the role should be them. So I just want you to think about this as we really think about and wrestle with, what does it mean to have women in politics? Can they step into these roles? And obviously, there are different issues for women of color. There are different issues for women of like a Muslim faith, where it's not a majority faith in this country. There are different issues that come up. But this understanding of role becomes really profound, I think, for whether or not we're going to actually change leadership and think about how we have more people. So it is true that in 2018 there was tremendous success of women. As I kind of alluded, I never really care at the end of the day sort of what a woman believes. I really do just vote for a woman because I keep saying that when we get to parity, I'm going to get picky. But we're not at parity yet. And I'm really tired of this whole conversation of like, yeah, but what if she's like a dumb woman or a woman I dislike, or what if it's a woman who's corrupt or stupid or whatever. I say to myself, well, there are corrupt and stupid men. Why can't there be corrupt and stupid women? I mean, women are half the population. Not all women are going to be great. So this is where I will tell you that I am somebody who says to myself, we just need more. We need more numbers. And when we get to some more numbers that start to look more like the population, more women, more people of color, when those numbers in leadership start to actually mirror the numbers in the population, then I'll start getting selected. But until then, I think this is a way that we sort of defeat ourselves. Because we don't realize that actually by being so picky, we're actually also keeping sort of the silent majority, if you will, white men in office. And nothing against white men. I have a wonderful husband who happens to be a white man, and I love him. But it is true that, that sort of dominant paradigm persists as long as sort of no one else challenges it. We have to keep challenging it. And this is where I will just say, not only were women incredibly successful in 2018, right, let's face it, Nancy Pelosi, she runs circles around Donald Trump every day. She has been phenomenally impressive. And guess what? Look how many years of experience she has. I would argue that a big part of the reason why she's able to kind of outmaneuver President Trump is because of all of her experience. The only one who poses a challenge for her, and the truth is, they kind of give as good as they get, is McConnell, right? Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. For all the same reasons. He has all of this experience. And both of their sort of political minds go at each other to try to figure out how to move the politics and the policies that they want. Now, I will also tell you that last year when I gave this talk, I was incredibly excited that we had all these women running for the presidency. I'm not so excited anymore. And the reason why I'm not so excited anymore is because what I feared would happen appears to have happened. And this is where it's as much a problem of political parties as it is our political culture. So if history and all these things say women sort of shouldn't be in these roles, the political parties tend to learn the wrong lessons. They look back at an election and they just learn the wrong lessons, right? So it's very telling that the Democrats have not picked a female vice presidential nominee since 1984. 1984. Geraldine Ferraro is the first Democratic woman to be picked as a vice presidential nominee, and also the only woman to have been picked as a vice presidential nominee on the Democratic side. Why? Well, I don't know why, because truthfully, Democrats told themselves that somehow she was the reason they lost in 84. Now, if you know anything about 1984, Ronald Reagan was incredibly popular. There was no way he was going to lose. The Democratic Party picked her because they were looking for a Hail Mary pass. It was their one hope that maybe they could upset the election dynamic. And you know what? She didn't catch the pass. And so now what, somehow the whole election was her fault? Really? And you know what? It's not like that's just on the Democratic side. Republicans did the same exact thing Sarah Palin. If you actually looked at the election dynamics, it was very unlikely that a Republican was going to win in 2008, because after 2 terms of President Bush, in which the country was very dissatisfied, and then the economy fell apart, there's no way that basically John McCain was going to be able to prevail in this. So what is his advisor say? I know, let's pick a woman, let's mess all this up. So then they pick a woman, threw her a Hail Mary pass. Granted, Palin was not prepared and not ready, but the truth is if you look at her speech after the Republican National Convention, people were terrified that she was actually really good. Really good. It scared a lot of people if you look at the immediate aftermath of her Republican convention speech. Then she went on to do a whole bunch of interviews in which she floundered because she wasn't prepared, which is really the problem of picking somebody who hadn't run for president. There's a reason why nominees typically pick other people who were on the trail with them. And it's because they've spent basically a year dealing with all the issues. So she wasn't prepared, she fell apart, but still, did the Republicans lose in 2008 because of Sarah Palin? No. They lost because of George W. Bush. Okay? They lost because John McCain was unable to successfully address the economic downturn. They didn't lose because of Palin. But guess what? It's not like the Republicans are going to pick another woman. So this problem is very much a part of parties, and I'm very fearful that that's where we are. And so this whole conversation and scandal and controversy that happened with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, my guess is Bernie Sanders was probably saying what I'm saying right now. He was probably saying, look, given where we are, I'd like to have a woman, but I don't know that we can have a woman because Hillary just lost. And because Hillary just lost, and because she's a woman, if we choose another woman, there's no way another woman can beat Donald Trump. My guess is he was sort of doing some hard-headed analysis. And I think, as Elizabeth Warren said, I think she's right. She said she disagreed. So I do think that that's probably what was going on. I also think that clearly, psychologically, somewhere in the electorate, this is also going on. Because we saw Senator Harris drop out. We saw Senator Gillibrand drop out. We've seen Senator Klobuchar have a very hard time of getting any level of traction, really, above, single digits. And Warren, who was on the national stage in the last presidential election, because people were wondering if she would challenge Hillary then, was really the only person who's been able to gain some traction. So as I look at this, I think to myself, it's great, we've got all these prospects, there is so much changing, all of these women won. In fact, in 2018, women candidates, in fact, did better than male candidates in the House elections and statewide as challengers and for the Democratic Party. That's not true now. So no, we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, and I wanted to see if there was one or two questions.
Okay. So all I would say is that at the end of the day, there are all these tremendous prospects, but I do think we could still very much be very far away from an actual woman president. Now, I could be wrong, and Klobuchar or Warren could upset this race, but I think it's a difficult one.
We have 1 or 2 questions, really fast, for Dr. Brown. It's okay. I think we've got one over here.
Thank you for being with us today. My name is Elizabeth Boston with Harvard Extension. And you had mentioned the impact of the monarchs being women, 2 prime ministers. And I'm wondering, had you given consideration or thought about that as part of the American experiment, that maybe that's also part of it, that we didn't want women, even though they were successful and worked, but we pushed that away.
Sure,
Somewhat.
sure. No, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, the interesting part is really that if you actually sort of study the intellectual transitions from the feudal time and the medieval time into the Enlightenment time, there is actually, from a philosophical standpoint, what happens is the Enlightenment essentially makes white men equal, okay? Oddly enough, in medieval time, what mattered was class. So what happens is that the class basically gets upended. But then when they upend class, sort of identity, if you will, replaces the discrimination. So right, oddly enough, like if you think back to Shakespeare, right? Othello is a Moor, right? He's also king. So we have a hard time imagining this, but the truth of the matter is, in the feudal era, as long as you were nobility, you could be any identity. You could be a woman, you could be a minority, as long as you came from noble blood, okay? So, oddly enough, right, you have sort of this whole feudal time where sort of the identity doesn't matter, your status does. And then what happens with the Enlightenment is this idea that all of that should go away. And when all of that goes away, then of course we have this other notion that, well, you know, now we have to create other levels of discrimination. And so what happens is in fact that white men rise up. And this is also to a certain extent true in US history. If you actually look at the voting laws, at the time of the founding, free slaves, so African Americans who held property could vote. Native Americans who held property could vote in many states. It was about your property ownership because it was about class. And then as we start to move into the early 1800s and into the Jacksonian Revolution, all of those laws basically prohibiting people of color, and certainly women were never essentially upset things. So I wouldn't say that it was about getting rid of women. It was really about this shift change from getting out of feudalism. And once we got out of feudalism, there was a new overlay of hierarchies in the world. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
You have to cut me off. That's okay. I know you have to leave.
And I'm sure that Laura would take questions if you want to email them to her.
Absolutely.
She